The rumble of construction woke me up at dawn. I looked out my bedroom window and nearly dropped my coffee mug. A cement truck was backing onto my ranch. My ranch. Workers in orange vests were directing it as if they owned the place. The land, fenced-off pasture that had once held my grazing horses, was now a chaotic mess of steel rods, gravel, and wet concrete hardening in the morning sun. And at the center of it all, standing with a clipboard like some kind of self-appointed general, was my next-door neighbor, Brian Talcott. A smug smile sat on his face as he directed the construction workers. I stormed down from the porch, rage boiling in my chest, but by the time I reached him, it was too late. Fresh concrete had already sealed an entire section of my land. "Brian, what the hell are you doing? This is my ranch," I shouted, practically choking on dust and disbelief. He didn't even blink. "This land technically touches the community lot. The HOA voted to expand the visitor parking area. It has already received approval." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had lived here for nearly 7 years. My ranch was miles outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I made sure of that when I bought the property. There were no contracts, no covenants, and no monthly dues. I was not part of any homeowners association. Yet here was my neighbor pouring concrete and turning my land into a parking lot like it was his God-given right. Then he uttered a statement that chilled my heart. "If you try to stop this, we'll fine you $1,000 a day for non-compliance. Don't make the situation harder on yourself." Fined me? I stood there stunned, watching them lay the final section of concrete while Brian chuckled and walked back to his house like he'd just done me a favor. I wish I could say I kept calm, but that day I made a silent vow. Brian had no idea who he was messing with, and I wasn't going to let this go. Not ever. Now here's how all this madness started. A few months ago, life was peaceful. My name is Travis Kent. I'm a retired firefighter who moved out to this ranch in Texas for peace, freedom, and wide open space. I bought 15 acres just outside a town called Redstone Ridge. It was the perfect place. There were no nosy neighbors and no HOA drama. There was nothing but the sound of nature and the freedom to do whatever I wanted with my land. At least, that's how it started. I first met Brian Talcott when he moved in next door. Even on weekends, he wore polo shirts tucked into khakis and drove a Tesla that he polished twice a day. His wife, Mara, was no better. She once asked if I could replant my trees because they didn't match the HOA-approved greenery. I laughed, told her I wasn't part of the HOA, and that was that. Or so I thought. Over time, things got weird. HOA newsletters started showing up in my mailbox. I got notices saying I was in violation of fence height regulations and unapproved livestock. One letter even accused me of letting my dog bark too loudly. I ignored them all. I knew my property was exempt from the HOA rules. I had the deeds, the maps, and even the county zoning office on my side. Then the small things began. One morning, I found a sign for a no parking HOA zone hammered into my fence. Another time, I noticed pink spray paint on the grass, marking a future site like some planned development. I confronted Brian and demanded answers, but he just shrugged. Maybe someone from the committee got confused. You know how these things are. I told the sheriff about the trespassing, but they couldn't do anything without proof. Brian kept up the friendly neighbor act in public, but I saw through it. He was planning something, and then came the land surveyor. I caught him near the south pasture setting up his equipment. I drove over in my pickup and asked what he was doing. "Just confirming boundaries for the HOA expansion," he said without even looking up. "What does the expansion encompass?" I asked, though I already knew. He pointed to my land, referring to it as his property. That night I drove straight to the county clerk's office. I pulled every zoning map, land record, and property survey I had. Everything confirmed my ranch was outside the HOA's reach. They calmly had no legal power over my property. None. But that didn't stop Brian. Weeks later, while I was away on a supply run, they came in full force. Dump trucks, cement mixer, surveyors, and security. And by the time I got home, part of my land had been turned into a concrete slab marked HOA parking visitors only. I tried to stop the trucks, but the workers said they were just following orders. I called the police, and the responding officer, who clearly knew Brian, said it was a civil matter. Civil? They'd paved part of my ranch. I contacted a lawyer, the EI, next morning. He was shocked. They've got nothing legal to stand on, he said, flipping through the documents. But you'll need an injunction to stop them. And fast. Otherwise, they'll finish the job and you'll have a real mess on your hands. It was already a mess. The next day, I found Brian walking along the newly poured lot with a few HOA board members, giving them a tour. I took photos, documented every word, and called my lawyer again. However, before I could proceed with filing the injunction, an unexpected event occurred, causing me to pause. That evening, I walked out to check on my horses and found the corral gate open. They were gone. I called out, searched the fields, and ran down the fences. Nothing. Someone had let them out. As I stood there in the dusk, my breath ragged, I saw tire tracks, fresh ones, leading from the corral gate straight across the pasture to the new concrete lot. And then I noticed something else. One of the parked construction trailers had hay stuck in its wheel wells. That was when it hit me. They didn't just let my horses out, they took them. And that's when everything changed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the front porch with my shotgun across my lap, staring out at that ugly concrete slab like it was a snake in my grass. My horses, my girls, Lady, the white mare I had nurtured from a foal, and Dusty, the chestnut gelding, stolen. And all signs pointed to the HOA goons who'd invaded my land. At sunrise, I made calls to the sheriff, animal control, and local shelters, but no one had seen or picked up any loose horses. It was as if they had simply disappeared. I drove straight to Brian's house. I didn't knock. I pounded. He opened the door in his robe, holding a protein shake like he was about to go play tennis. You lost something? He smirked as if I were the joke. I forced myself to breathe. You know exactly what happened to my horses. I have proof someone drove a trailer across my field. Don't play games with me, Brian. He sipped his drink and leaned against the doorframe. Look, Travis, if your animals wandered off, it might be a sign that you're not managing your land properly. The HOA can help provide guidance and support. Are you referring to crimes such as livestock theft and illegal parking lot construction? Illegal is a strong word, he said, and then he winked. Maybe it's just misunderstood. Progress. I left before I did something that would land me in jail. However, my work was not yet complete. That same day, I installed trail cams around the perimeter of my ranch, which provided real-time feeds and sent motion detection alerts straight to my phone. I wanted evidence, proof. It wasn't merely a matter of reclaiming my possessions. I was going to bury Brian and his little suburban empire. By evening, I got a ping. The footage was blurry, but it showed two men in reflective vests sneaking into my barn area the night before. One was holding a rope. The other had a large bag slung over his shoulder. I zoomed in and froze the image. The bag had a logo, Redstone Ridge HOA Committee. My lawyer, Rick, met me the next morning. He was a sharp-tongued, boot-wearing Texan who didn't trust banks and loved fights. He was an ideal match for someone like me. He reviewed the camera footage and nodded. That's enough to request an emergency injunction. If your horses are missing, it could qualify as theft. We'll file a restraining order against any HOA activity on your land. Rick moved fast. He drew up and submitted the papers by noon. But that same afternoon, I got another call from the sheriff's office, this time from a different deputy. Mr. Kent, we received an anonymous tip. Someone says you're harboring stolen HOA equipment on your property. What? I almost laughed. Mind if we come take a look? They showed up with a warrant, which was signed, suspiciously quickly. Sure enough, they found a stack of unused HOA signs behind my tool shed. The signs were unlike anything I had ever seen in my life. Planted. They were planting evidence. The deputy was young, maybe too green to notice the setup, but I saw the seed of doubt in his eyes when I showed him my property layout and pointed out that anyone could have tossed those signs over the fence. That night, I didn't sleep again. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done playing nice. The next morning, I filed a counter-complaint with the county commissioner's office. Rick helped draft a formal stop citing boundary violations, illegal construction, theft of livestock, and trespassing. We mailed certified letters to every HOA board member. We allowed them 72 hours to remove the parking lot or face a lawsuit so big it would collapse the entire HOA. And then I got a break. A rancher from 3 towns over called me after seeing a post I made online about the missing horses. "Are you looking for a white mare and a chestnut gelding?" I came across 2 such horses tied behind an abandoned barn outside Jasper. I jumped in my truck and drove 2 hours, heart racing, and there they were, my horses, thin, thirsty, and trembling, but alive. I loaded them up and brought them home, and as I stepped out of the trailer, something even more shocking happened. A county inspector's truck pulled into my driveway. I hadn't called him. He stepped out with a clipboard, looked around, and said, "We've received complaints of unpermitted construction on your property. I need to assess the site." I blinked. Complaints? From whom? He didn't answer. He walked over to the concrete slab and studied it. "Who authorized this?" "No one," I replied. "This land is private. I didn't give permission for any of it." He scribbled notes. "That's a serious zoning violation. They did not respect the property lines. Looks like this was done without county approval, permits, or inspections. Can you do something?" I asked. "Oh, we're not just doing something, we're shutting the operation down." I exhaled for the first time in days. But just as I walked him back to his truck, I noticed something else happening down the road. A black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up outside Brian's house. 3 men in suits got out. One was carrying a folder with the HOA seal on it. The other had a camera. The third person was from the county auditor's office. They weren't just investigating me. They were coming for him too. And that was when the truly began. The next 48 hours were chaos. The county inspector's report was damning. Unauthorized construction, zoning laws being violated, disturbance of agricultural land reported, no permits, no consent from the landowner, and most importantly, it was all on my side of the property line. By that evening, a bright orange sign went up at the edge of the concrete lot. "Condemned. This is a county property violation. Do not enter." It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in weeks. However, Brian was far from finished. The morning after the county posted the notice, I woke up to a boom. A loud crash shook the floor under my feet. I ran outside and froze. Someone had smashed one of the cement slabs to pieces. Massive fissures crisscrossed the surface with a bulldozer strategically positioned at its center. The driver wore a reflective vest and a tough hat with HOA contractor printed on the front. "Hey!" I shouted, storming toward him. He looked up from the dashboard and shrugged. I received instructions to remove the slab. The owner stated that the project was part of the HOA. "It is being shut down on my property. Do you believe you can return here as if you have ownership?" "You are simply adhering to our instructions, sir. We were told the location was community land. We didn't know the issue wasn't resolved." I whipped out my phone and started recording. "This is private property. You are trespassing. Shut it down right now or I'm calling the sheriff." He panicked, muttered into his radio, then quickly drove the bulldozer off the slab and back onto the street, tearing up the edge of my fence on the way out. I did call the sheriff. This time, Deputy Carlson came out. Deputy Carlson was a seasoned officer with extensive knowledge of the area. "I thought you weren't part of the HOA, Travis," he said, looking around at the cracked slab and destroyed fence. "I'm not. I never was." He pulled out a folded paper from his front pocket and handed it to me. "Then you might want to see this." Brian filed a formal petition with the county planning board last year to annex your land into the HOA zone. It appears that the maps he submitted were forged. My hands trembled as I read it. The man had literally faked maps and documents to claim my land belonged to the HOA. "And somehow it almost worked," Carlson added. "But here's the twist. He submitted it under a different name, a shell entity, one registered under his wife's name." I stared at him. "You mean Mara?" He nodded. "We created Mara Holdings LLC 6 months ago. The HOA hired them for expansion planning. It's a front. Everything made sense now. The fake notices, the spray-painted plans, the surveyors, and even the planted signs behind my shed. It wasn't incompetence. It was organized theft. Rick, my lawyer, nearly jumped out of his boots when I showed him the documents. "This changes everything," he said, his eyes wide. "This is fraud and conspiracy. You're sitting on enough evidence to take down the whole HOA board. I just want them off my land." "Oh, you'll get that now. Now you're going to own their clubhouse when this is over." We filed a civil suit that same day. The allegations included fraud, trespassing, property destruction, livestock theft, and defamation. Rick also submitted a motion to freeze the HOA's operating funds until the matter was resolved. But retaliation came quick. That night, someone cut my power. My ranch runs mostly on solar, but I have a backup generator for emergencies. I walked out to the back shed to check the fuse and found the generator ripped open, wires snipped. They weren't just messing with my property now. They were trying to break me. I fixed the generator and called the power company. No outage, no explanation. Someone is tampering with my systems without my knowledge or permission. The next morning, I received a new letter in my mailbox, a bill from the HOA, $742.94 for parking lot construction, HOA surveying services and administrative processing fees, due immediately. I burst into laughter. It wasn't just criminal, it was delusional. I took the letter straight to Rick. "Let them keep sending threats," he said, filing them in our growing evidence folder. Every word they penned adds more weight to their threats. Meanwhile, the county had launched its investigation. The 3 men in suits I saw earlier weren't just auditors. They were part of the county's fraud and compliance team. And Brian, he was officially under review. However, the HOA continued to exert pressure. They called an emergency meeting at the town hall and tried to spin the story. "A dangerous neighbor is resisting community standards," they said. They cited unsafe structures, illegal livestock, and aggressive behavior as examples. The lies were as bold as they were stupid. Unfortunately for them, I wasn't the only one watching. Several neighbors had seen the parking lot being built without permits. Others had footage of construction crews crossing property lines. One neighbor, a quiet woman named Ellen, had even taken a video of Brian bragging at a cookout that he'd taken care of the old ranch land problem. That video made its way to the county office and then to the local news. Within 24 hours, my story was on the evening broadcast. Ranch owner battles HOA over land grab. They built a parking lot on my property. Suddenly, everyone knew. Brian wasn't smiling anymore. 2 days later, just as I started repairing my busted fence and filling the cracks in the land, a large truck pulled into my driveway. It wasn't county. It wasn't police. It was a demolition crew. A crew of 4 men got out and began inspecting the concrete slab. One of them, a tall guy with a clipboard, walked up to me. "Are you Travis Kent?" "Yeah." "Court order. We're here to demolish the illegal construction on your land. Full removal down to the soil." I blinked. "Wait, you mean today?" He nodded. "Right, now." And with that, they fired up the jackhammers. Brian's parking lot, the symbol of his arrogance of everything he tried to steal, was about to be pulverized into dust. But just as the machines roared to life, one of the workers yelled, "Hey, there's something under the concrete." Everyone stopped. We all rushed over, and what we saw next left everyone speechless. The dust was still rising as the jackhammers fell, silent. The worker who shouted knelt by the freshly broken concrete, his gloved hands brushing away gravel. I stepped closer, my boots crunching over the rubble, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Beneath the slab, barely a few inches below the surface, were several buried plastic totes. The large gray storage bins were sealed and stacked as if they were being hidden in a shallow grave. The demolition crew exchanged looks. "You didn't know about these?" the foreman asked. "Absolutely not," I said. "That's my land. I've never put anything like that there." Another worker tugged at one of the containers, wrenching it free from the surrounding debris. The lid popped loose. Inside were dozens of official-looking HOA documents, paperwork, maps, envelopes, and sealed letters. Some looked fresh. Others were already yellowing with age. What was the most unexpected surprise? Each document had my name on it. The fake documents included fake HOA violation letters, forged notices bearing my signature, forged ballots implying my vote on community policies, and even a backdated consent form approving the construction of the parking lot. I reeled back. Brian must have buried this junk before the pour, I muttered. The foreman looked stunned. Did they build the slab on top of evidence that had been planted? This goes way beyond a zoning violation, man. The situation is a full-blown cover-up. We immediately contacted the sheriff. When Deputy Carlson arrived and saw the bins, he radioed it in like it was a crime scene, which by that point it was. They sealed the site off with yellow tape, and within hours, county investigators were on the scene snapping photos and pulling documents with gloves and tweezers. One investigator pulled me aside. "Mr. Kent, I don't mean to alarm you, but this isn't just about your property anymore. What is the extent and complexity of this fraud? We're talking potential racketeering charges, and if the HOA president is involved." "You mean Brian?" I asked. He nodded grimly. "Yeah, he might have just buried his career." Brian's arrest occurred the following day. Yes, arrested. It wasn't just the buried fake documents. They also traced financial transfers from HOA dues into his wife's dummy LLC, Mara Holdings, which had received over $110,000 for expansion consulting. That money was supposed to go into community services, playground repairs, sidewalk lighting, and neighborhood patrols. Instead, it was financing Brian's little empire building project, and part of it had been used to bribe contractors into building on my ranch. The news exploded. HOA president arrested in land grab scandal, the headlines screamed. And suddenly, neighbors who had been silent were lining up to testify. HOA members who had once smiled politely at meetings were now sharing texts, emails, and voice recordings. People who were scared of Brian were finally speaking up. Meanwhile, I focused on healing my land. I used a backhoe to help the demolition crew clear the last of the concrete. Where the lot once stood, I planted grass seed and laid down hay. My horses returned to the pasture, their eyes wide and nervous, but slowly adjusting back to peace. Neighbors I barely knew came by to apologize, to thank me, and to help rebuild. Ellen brought a pie. Mark from 2 streets over helped me replace my broken corral gate. One man I didn't even recognize gave me a firm handshake and said, "Thank you. You stood up when we didn't, you made them stop." Still, just when I thought the storm had passed, one final surprise came knocking. It was a cold Tuesday morning when I heard tires on gravel again. A white pickup truck with a government seal pulled up, and a woman stepped out wearing a pressed blazer and holding a briefcase. "Mr. Kent, my name is Victoria Barnes. I'm from the State Property and Land Rights Commission. May I have a few minutes?" I invited her onto the porch. She pulled out a file and laid it on the table between us. "We've been reviewing the situation, involving your property, the fraud, the forged documents, and the unapproved annexation attempt. But there's something else." She pulled out an old land map. "This," she said, tapping the paper, "was the original zoning blueprint for Redstone Ridge 25 years ago, back before the HOA was even established." I nodded slowly. "This area right here, your land, was actually designated as protected ranch land, meaning it's not just exempt from HOA jurisdiction. It's immune to any future zoning changes by law." I stared at the map, then at her. What had been going on all this time? She smiled. "You were untouchable. Legally speaking, your land is in a conservation category. That means no HOA, no commercial use, and no development can touch it without a unanimous county vote, which never happened." I let out a long, slow breath. Despite all the suffering, threats, and sabotage, I managed to breathe deeply, and I had been protected by a law even the HOA didn't know about. She stood up. "We're also offering you a settlement. Due to the hardship, destruction of property, and violation of state-protected land, the county is awarding you compensation." She handed me a letter. I opened it. $250,000. I blinked. "You're serious?" "Consider it part of a public apology," she said. I leaned back in my chair, dazed. Well, I guess that'll help me rebuild. But just as she was leaving, her phone buzzed. She answered, then turned back to me. "One more thing," she said. "Brian just posted bail, but he's already under state investigation, and we received word he's trying to meet with HOA board members in secret." I frowned. "What for?" "We're not sure," she said, "but you might want to be careful. Some individuals never surrender without making a last attempt." That night, as I scrutinized the trail cams and secured the barn, I experienced a peculiar sensation in my gut, suggesting that the war had not yet concluded. And the next morning, that feeling came true because someone or some people had returned during the night. And what they left behind at my front gate was a message I'll never forget. At dawn, I walked to my front gate the same as I did every morning to check the mailbox and feed the barn cats. But today, before I could walk 5 steps past the porch, something halted my progress. There, nailed into my wooden gatepost, was a large white sign. Spray-painted in dripping red letters, it read, "We don't forget. This land was never yours." Beneath it, I guessed, was a crude drawing of a bull's skull with a red X over it, symbolic of my ranch. I froze. My heart thudded once, heavy and hard. They had come back, and whoever they were, they had trespassed during the night. I quickly scanned the ground. Boot prints. Not just 1 pair, but 3 pairs. The treads were wide and heavy. Someone had parked near the road and walked in. I pulled out my phone and checked my trail cams. Nothing. They had known exactly where the cameras were and had stayed just out of their field of view. That was no coincidence. This was a message. I took down the sign, snapped pictures, and called Deputy Carlson. He arrived within the hour. "Retaliation," he muttered as he examined the gatepost. My guess? Some remaining board members or close associates of Brian. People like that don't take embarrassment well. Well, I sighed. I thought with Brian arrested and the parking lot torn up, it was over. Carlson shook his head. People like Brian don't act alone, and when they feel cornered, they panic. Occasionally, they get stupid. Sometimes they're dangerous. He advised me to stay alert, keep the trail cams active, and file the sign as evidence. We filed an incident report, and I added the photo to the ever-growing file I had compiled since this madness began. But I didn't just sit and wait. That night, I installed new floodlights and set up 4 more hidden trail cams, all with night vision. I even added a motion sensor alarm at the back gate. Just as I completed the setup, a new storm erupted, taking me by surprise. The storm began, not outside my gate but within my lawyer's office. Rick called me the next morning. "You won't believe this," he said. "What now?" "The HOA board's attorney just filed a countersuit. They're claiming you damaged HOA property when you let the county tear up the concrete slab." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you referring to the slab that was poured on my land without authorization?" "Exactly. They're framing it as malicious destruction of shared community property. This claim is completely baseless, yet they are employing it as a deceptive tactic. They hope to drag you into court, waste your time, and get a judge to delay the fraud case against them." "So it's a smokescreen?" "Yep. But don't worry, we're filing for dismissal. I just wanted you to be prepared for the circus." The hits just kept coming. By the end of the week, a fake article showed up in the local HOA newsletter. I got a copy. From Ellen, my neighbor. What does the article's headline mean? "A local ranch owner faces civil charges over illegal activity that endangers HOA progress." It painted me as a lawless landowner, accusing me of sabotaging community growth and fabricating claims to discredit HOA leadership. The accusations infuriated me deeply. This wasn't just retaliation. It was a full-on smear campaign. So I did what any rancher with grit and a spine would do. I responded. I contacted the same local news station that had covered the parking lot scandal and invited them for a follow-up interview. This time, I let them see everything. The buried totes, the red sign on my gate, the fake newsletter article, and even Brian's forged annexation map. And I gave them a quote that aired on the evening segment. They thought this land was weak simply because it stood alone. But this ranch has roots deeper than any concrete slab, and I'm not backing down. neither now nor in the future. The response was massive. People flooded the HOA's community board with angry comments. Local ranchers, homeowners from nearby counties, and even small-town politicians spoke out in support. They called for audits, demanded resignations, and a few brave souls finally confessed to what Brian had done to them years ago. The cracks in the HOA became impossible to hide. Then something wild happened. Rick called me one night, and I could tell from the energy in his voice that something huge had just landed. "Travis, we just got subpoena access to Brian's private HOA email server. Okay, we found everything. I mean everything. Not only were there fake documents and fraud, but there were also internal messages, bribes to contractors, threats sent to dissenting homeowners, and even discussions about using HOA funds to dig a private pool on Mara's sister's property." I sat down hard. He continued. "We also found minutes from a secret meeting where they admitted they knew your ranch wasn't under HOA authority. They called it a necessary land acquisition and said, quote, 'The old man won't fight back once we start paving.' Oh, I fought back," I said, almost laughing. He chuckled too. "Oh, they know now. But the best part, there's a recording, Travis. One of the board members, Gary the treasurer, recorded one of their private meetings, probably to save himself. In that meeting, Brian admitted to personally ordering the concrete pour on your land before the county ruled. He said, quote, 'We'll build it first and the rancher will just have to accept it. By the time anyone notices, we'll have the permits pushed through.' It was a crucial step toward success. I gave Rick the go-ahead to release that recording to the media and to the county fraud investigators. Brian Talcott faced another arrest the following day. This time, the arrest was not only for trespassing or zoning violations, but also for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. And as for the remaining HOA board members, every single one of them either resigned or was placed under investigation. But just when I thought we'd reached the final blow, something worse happened. I was driving home from the supply store hauling some new fencing materials when I noticed smoke on the horizon. The smoke was black, thick, rising fast, and coming from the direction of my ranch. I forcefully depressed the gas pedal, tearing down the road. As I reached the top of the hill and saw my property, my heart ceased. The barn was on fire, and I could see movement. A figure running from the backside. It was happening again. But this time it wasn't just sabotage, it was arson. I slammed on the brake so hard my truck skidded sideways in the gravel, narrowly missing the ditch. I jumped out before it stopped moving, sprinting toward the barn, heat already stinging my face. Flames licked the night sky like devil tongues. My horses were outside, thank God. I had moved them to the north paddock earlier. But my hay reserves, tool saddles, and a decade's worth of memories were all inside that wooden structure now roaring with fire. "No!" I shouted, grabbing a garden hose despite knowing it wouldn't help. I turned it on anyway, spraying the side of the barn just to slow the spread, but it was already too late. Just then, I heard these sirens blaring loudly and growing closer. The volunteer fire crew from Redstone Ridge pulled in, trucks spraying, foam and water. Within seconds, neighbors gathered across the fence line, eyes wide, some of them crying. Even Deputy Carlson arrived, flashing lights cutting through the smoke. I ran to him. I saw someone, a figure running out the back. I couldn't see their face. He put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll find them. We've already got units searching the area." He wasn't bluffing. I had installed trail cams around the barn and strategically placed new ones to capture the entire event on video. The arsonist wore a dark hoodie, but the footage was clear. They crept around the back, doused the wall with gasoline, lit a match, and ran. But as they turned to escape, a brief gust of wind blew their hood slightly back, just enough to reveal their profile. Rick was with me in the sheriff's office when the footage was pulled up on the monitor, and we both said the name at the same time. Mara, Brian's wife. The one who used to chastise me for keeping my grass too tall. The one who smiled sweetly at bake sales, and behind that smile harbored a vendetta darker than her husband's crimes. She had set the fire, not just out of vengeance, but to destroy the last piece of evidence. The barn had been the storage point for all the original documents, signs, and video footage of the illegal construction before we handed them to the investigators. Regrettably, I had already stored everything on the cloud. The sheriff's department arrested her 2 hours later at her sister's home in the next county. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She just asked, "Is it over?" "Yes, Mara." It was. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, cleanup, and rebuilding. The HOA board dissolved. The community held an emergency election to replace them, but not before a new rule was passed. There could be no HOA expansion without the unanimous approval and oversight of all homeowners. Both Brian and Mara received indictments. Brian has been charged with conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and theft. Mara was charged with arson and evidence destruction. This time the judge denied their bail, their assets frozen. Who did the county appoint as the oversight witness during the HOA restructuring? That's right, me. Travis Kent, the frustrated old rancher they tried to erase. The same man stood in cowboy boots, a dusted hat, and a fire-scorched flannel shirt as the county commissioner shook my hand and said, "Thank you for protecting what's right." My neighbors came out one by one to apologize, to thank me, and to help rebuild. Ellen brought plywood. Mark brought his teenage sons to help hammer beams. A young couple even brought a paint bucket and said, "This is all we can afford, but we want to help." We rebuilt the barn together, stronger, safer, fire-resistant materials, metal roof. The facility boasts a new ventilation system. A camera tower was erected above the entire system. Upon completion, we hosted a small celebration. Grilled, burgers, sweet tea. The horses were back in their stalls. The kids were running across the pasture as if it was all just a dream. As the sun set that day, painting the sky with orange and gold, I stood on my porch and looked out over my land. Unbothered, undivided mine, the concrete is no longer available. There will be no more signs. There will be no more HOA boundary lines creeping across my fence. And best of all, peace. It is the kind of peace that only comes when you stand your ground. It occurs when you defend what is rightfully yours. It's not just about using your physical strength, but also about utilizing your inner strength. Because this ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was a promise. It was a promise that freedom is worth fighting for. And occasionally the quietest man on the land is the loudest force the world never saw.